The coffee in Lieutenant Jake Miller's mug had turned into something resembling cold motor oil 3 hours ago. But he couldn't bring himself to care. Another mind-numbing night shift at Deep Space Station Omega, floating in the void between nowhere and nothing special. The communication array hummed its usual monotonous tune, scanning empty frequencies for signals that never came. Jake rubbed his bloodshot eyes and wondered, not for the first time, why humanity had built listening posts this far out in the first place. Sure, the scientists talked about discovering new civilizations and expanding human knowledge. But after 18 months of monitoring cosmic background radiation, Jake was pretty sure the universe was just one big, lonely place filled with dead air. He was wrong. Dead wrong. The first hint something had changed was a subtle shift in the static pattern dancing across his monitors. Jake straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. Years of training kicked in as his fingers moved instinctively across the console, fine-tuning the receivers. The static grew louder, more chaotic. And then the transmission hit like a lightning bolt through his nervous system. It wasn't human. That much was immediately terrifyingly clear. The signal carried harmonics and frequencies that no Earthborn vocal cords could produce, yet somehow the raw desperation bleeding through the alien sounds was universally recognizable. The station's auto-translation systems, designed by linguists who'd only dreamed of this moment, began working frantically to decode the impossible. Jake's hands trembled as he watched. The translation matrix struggled with concepts and grammar, structures that had never existed in human language. Words began forming on his screen, fragmented at first, then with growing clarity and mounting horror. Urgent transmission. Peaceful trading vessel under attack. Coordinates attached. Require immediate assistance. The blood in Jake's veins turned to Arctic water. Real aliens, real danger, and they were asking for help. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Life support failing. They're boarding us now. Peaceful species. We have nitrogen weapons. Jake's training took over even as his mind reeled. From the implications, this wasn't just first contact. This was first contact with someone screaming for their lives. His fingers flew across emergency protocols he'd practiced 1,000 times, but never expected to use. Gods, they're in the bridge, killing the crew. Children in the lower holds. Please, anyone who receives this. The signal strength indicator showed the transmission was weakening. Whatever was happening to these aliens, time was running out fast. Jake's finger hovered over the red emergency beacon for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to realize he was about to change the course of human history, but not long enough to second-guess himself, as the beacon activated with a soft chime that seemed absurdly peaceful given the circumstances. Within moments, communication channels throughout the Sol system lit up like Christmas trees. Military commanders, politicians, scientists who'd been sleeping peacefully in their beds were suddenly very, very awake. The response came faster than Jake had dared hope. Admiral Marcus's Stone's weathered face filled the main display screen, gray eyes sharp as surgical steel despite being roused from sleep. Stone was a legend in the fleet, a man who'd cut his teeth in the Jupiter mining wars and earned his stars, putting down 3 separate colonial rebellions. If humanity was going to war, you wanted Marcus Stone leading the charge. Lieutenant Miller, I need a full report. Now. Stone's voice carried the kind of authority that made mountains move and politicians shut up. Jake's words tumbled out in a rush as he transmitted. The alien signaled directly to Fleet Command. Sir, we've got a genuine distress call from unknown aliens. Translation software indicates peaceful traders under attack by hostile forces. Signal originated from the Proxima sector, approximately 72 hours at maximum burn. Stone's scarred features didn't change expression, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Jake had heard rumors about the Admiral's past, whispers about what had happened to the pirates who'd attacked civilian transports in the Outer Rim. Those pirates had simply disappeared. Confirmed, Lieutenant. I'm mobilizing the Pacific Fleet immediately. Full combat loadout, maximum acceleration protocols. Stone paused, and when he spoke again, His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We launch in 40 minutes." Jake swallowed hard, suddenly aware they were about to commit acts that would echo through history. "Sir, shouldn't we attempt diplomatic contact first? Try to assess the situation. Maybe reach out to the attackers." And Admiral Stone's smile was razor-thin and colder than space itself. "Son, someone just called for help. In my experience, when civilians are screaming for their lives, diplomacy is what you do after you've dealt with whoever made them scream." The transmission cut with surgical precision, leaving Jake alone in the sudden silence of the communications center. The alien signal had gone completely dead, whether from equipment failure or something far worse. He couldn't tell. But he could tell one thing with absolute certainty. Humanity had just received its first message from the stars. And it was a cry for help from strangers they'd never met. And Admiral Marcus Stone was about to answer that call with every weapon in the human arsenal. Jake stared at his dark monitors and wondered if the universe was ready. What was coming? Somewhere out there, peaceful aliens were fighting for their lives against unknown predators. They had no idea that help was coming from a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history turning predators into extinct curiosities. The question wasn't whether humanity would respond to the call. The question was whether anything would be left of the attackers when humanity finished responding. Commander Vextar's razor-sharp claws traced lazy patterns across the command console as he watched his boarding crews work their brutal magic on the Quillen merchant vessel. The satisfaction was almost intoxicating, like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction that he'd performed. Countless times before, the Shadowclaw Syndicate hadn't built their reputation on mercy or fair fights. They were apex predators in a galaxy full of sheep. And business had never been better. Through the tactical display, Vextar could see his assault teams carving through the merchant ship's hull like it was made of tissue paper rather than military-grade alloy. The herbivorous Quillen crew inside were probably huddled together right now, their large eyes wide with terror. It's making those pathetic mewling sounds that all prey species made when they realized their peaceful philosophy wasn't going to save them. It never got old, really. You'd think after 17 conquered systems and thousands of raids, the thrill would wear off. But watching another species learn that the universe didn't care about their principles, that never stopped being entertaining. "Commander," his lieutenant's voice crackled through the cum with barely contained excitement. "Breaching teams have secured the main cargo holds. You're going to want to hear this." Vextar's black eyes gleamed with anticipation as he leaned forward in his command throne. The throne itself was carved from the bones of his first kill, a diplomatic envoy from some forgotten species that had tried to negotiate safe passage through Shtokla space. Negotiations had been brief and decidedly one-sided. "Crystal, and this better be worth interrupting my entertainment." "Oh, it's worth it, sir. We've got a rich haul here. Medical supplies that'll fetch premium prices on the black market. Rare metals including a full cargo hold of processed iridium." And Crystal's voice took on the tone of someone delivering an early birthday present, 47 live specimens. Perfect for the fighting pits on Nexus Prime. Vextar's mandibles clicked together in satisfaction, producing a sound like breaking bones. The fighting pits were where the real money was made. Civilized species across the galaxy had an apparently endless appetite for watching captured prey animals tear each other apart for their entertainment. The irony was delicious, peaceful species being consumed by the bloodlust of other peaceful species, who were just slightly higher up the food chain. Excellent work. "What about resistance levels?" Vextar asked, though he already knew the answer. It was always the same with these herbivore traders. Minimal, as expected. They've locked themselves in their emergency shelters and keep broadcasting. Surrender offers. The usual pathetic bleating about being peaceful merchants with families. Crystal's slaff was like grinding metal. "Should we accept their surrender, Commander?" Slash specifically to during slash from bone. Of course, we'll accept their surrender, Lieutenant. Right after we demonstrate what happens to species that fly through our territory without paying tribute. These peaceful traders never seem to learn from the examples of others. They flew their fat, defenseless ships through space like gift-trapped presents, trusting in the mercy of species that had evolved far beyond such weakness. It was almost insulting how naive they were, as if the universe operated on some kind of cosmic honor system where good intentions were rewarded and aggression was punished. The real universe didn't work that way. The real universe belonged to predators, and everything else was just meat waiting to be harvested. Execute half the crew for our entertainment, then prepare the rest for interrogation. Vexstar commanded with the casual tone most people use to order lunch. I want to know what other trade routes they've been using. Knowledge is profit, after all. Understood, Commander. What about their communications array? Should we burn it? Vexstar interrupted. Can't have other prey species getting ideas. About rescue missions or distress calls. The last thing we need is some other herbivore fleet stumbling in here trying to play hero. But as Crixtal moved to carry out his orders, Vexstar felt a brief moment of something that might have been unease. Not fear. Shadowclaw warriors didn't feel fear, but perhaps ... caution. The merchant vessel's distress beacon had been broadcasting for several minutes before his weapons had destroyed it. Long enough for the signal to propagate through subspace to who knows where. He shrugged off the concern. What was the worst that could happen? Some other prey species might receive the signal and decide to investigate, find wreckage, and bodies learn their lesson about the price of curiosity and scurry back to whatever garden world they came from with their tails between their legs. It wasn't like the signal would reach anyone dangerous. Vexstar's extensive databases contained detailed information about every known spacefaring species within 100 light-years. Peaceful traders, scientific explorers, diplomatic missions, all sheep wearing different colored wool. None of them had the weapons, the will, or the warrior culture necessary to challenge the Shadowclaw Syndicate. The thought of actual opposition was almost amusing. What would a genuine predator species even look like? Probably something like the Shadowclaw, themselves evolved from hunt-pack killers, forged in the crucible of endless warfare, shaped by a homeworld where only the most ruthless survived to breed. But Vexstar was wrong about one critical detail. The Quillen's desperate SOS had indeed punched through subspace before his weapons destroyed their communications array. The message was racing toward a system whose name didn't exist in any Shadowclaw database, carrying with it coordinates and a plea for help that would soon reach ears that had never heard of surrender. A system called Earth, populated by a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history proving that the most dangerous predators were often the ones that looked like prey until you made the mistake of threatening their pack. The hunters were about to become the hunted. Commander Vexstar had absolutely no idea what was coming for him through the cold dark of space, but he was about to learn why some species choose diplomacy not from weakness, but because the alternative is too terrible to unleash on an unsuspecting galaxy. The real question wasn't whether humanity would respond to the Quillen distress call. The question was whether the Shadowclaw Syndicate would survive long enough to regret sending it. Captain Emma Walsh gripped the railing of the UFS Retribution's bridge so tightly her knuckles had gone white, but her voice remained steady as granite when she spoke. Time to intercept. 14 minutes at current acceleration, Captain replied. Her navigation officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chen? The young woman's face was pale but determined this was her first real combat mission. And everyone knew it. Emma nodded curtly, her eyes never leaving the tactical display that showed the unfolding nightmare ahead of them. 3 alien vessels, each roughly the size of a human destroyer, had surrounded what appeared to be a civilian merchant ship. But this wasn't some coordinated rescue operation or diplomatic escort. The alien ships moved like sharks circling wounded prey, their sleek hulls bristling with weapon ports and boarding equipment. The burning merchant vessel, presumably the source of the distress call that had brought the Pacific Fleet screaming across 3 star systems, was clearly dying. Atmosphere vented from dozens of hull breaches, creating a ghostly aurora around the ship as vital gases froze instantly in the vacuum of space. Emergency beacons strobed desperately, painting the surrounding darkness in alternating red and white. "Jesus," whispered Weapons Officer Marcus Thompson, a 20-year veteran who'd seen his share of pirate attacks on the frontier. "They're not even trying to board cleanly. They're just ... butchering them." Emma felt her jaw clench involuntarily. The alien vessel configurations were like nothing in their databases, but their purpose was unmistakable. Every design element screamed Predator forward-swept weapon pods, reinforced ramming prows, and what looked suspiciously like specialized equipment for capturing rather than destroying their targets. These weren't explorers or traders or even conventional military vessels. These were hunters, and they were very good at their job. "Admiral Stone to all ships." The fleet commander's voice cut through the bridge chatter with surgical precision. "Battle stations. Combat protocols are now in effect. Remember, people, this isn't just first contact anymore. This is first contact with someone who kills civilians for sport." The bridge of the Retribution transformed in seconds from a place of scientific wonder to an instrument of war. Blast shutters sealed the viewports. Tactical displays replaced navigation charts. And the gentle hum of life support systems was joined by the deeper thrum of charging weapon capacitors. "Captain," Communications Officer Tommy Rodriguez's voice carried a note of tension that made everyone turn. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead alien vessel. They're hailing us." Emma exchanged a quick glance with Admiral Stone's image on her command screen. First contact protocols called for careful, measured responses designed to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to interstellar incidents. But those protocols had been written by diplomats who'd never watched alien predators tear apart civilian ships. "Put it through, Rodriguez. It's full translation protocols, and record everything." The main display flickered, and suddenly they were staring into the face of something that belonged in humanity's darkest nightmares. Reptilian features dominated the screen-scaled skin, the color of dried blood, eyes like chips of obsidian, and a mouthful of teeth that evolution had designed specifically for tearing flesh. When it spoke, its voice carried the casual arrogance of someone who'd never encountered meaningful opposition. The translation system worked frantically to convert alien concepts into human language, but the meaning came through with crystalline clarity. "Unknown primitives, you have stumbled into Shadowclaw hunting grounds. Retreat immediately or join these pathetic herbivores as our prey."
You may.
Mitigate RY dead. The ship's reactor. Emma could feel her crew's anger radiating like heat from a blast furnace, their faces hard as carved stone. These aliens hadn't just attacked civilians, they'd threatened human ships and called them prey. That was a mistake they were about to regret with every fiber of their being. Admiral Stone's response was delivered in the same calm, measured tone he might use to discuss the weather or order breakfast. But Emma had served under Stone long enough to recognize the deadly quiet that preceded the storm. "Shadowclaw vessel, you have attacked civilian targets and threatened Federation ships. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded before we demonstrate why Earth produces predators, not prey." The alien's laughter was like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal, sound that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the primitive fear centers of the human brain. "Foolish mammals. We are the Shadowclaw Syndicate. We have conquered 17 star systems and enslaved billions. Your soft species will make amusing pets for our entertainment." Now that was interesting. 17 star systems? Billions of enslaved sentience? Emma's mind raced through the implications while her finger moved instinctively to the weapon control authorization key around her neck. These weren't just pirates or raiders. They were running what amounted to a galactic scale slavery operation, which made what happened next not just justified, but absolutely necessary. "Your mistake," Admiral Stone replied with deadly finality, then cut the transmission. The alien's arrogant face vanished, replaced by tactical displays showing target solutions and weapon trajectories. Stone turned to Emma with eyes like Arctic storms. "Captain Walsh, you are weapons free. Show them what happens when you threaten human civilians." Emma's smile was sharp enough to cut steel as she turned to face her weapons officer.
Yes.
Around the bridge, Her crew straightened with predatory focus. They'd trained for this moment their entire careers, not first contact with peaceful aliens, but the darker possibility that humanity's neighbors might be something far more dangerous. Admiral. All batteries, target the lead vessel. Emma's voice carried across the bridge with absolute authority. Let's give these reptiles a biology lesson they'll never forget. The question hanging in space wasn't whether humanity would fight to protect innocent civilians. The question was whether the Shadowclaw Syndicate would survive long enough to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. They were about to discover why a species that had crawled up from the bottom of Earth's food chain had very strong opinions about bullies who preyed on the weak, and those opinions were about to be expressed in the universal language of high-velocity tungsten slugs and fusion warheads. The Pacific Fleet's opening salvo was pure poetry written in the language of controlled violence and surgical precision. Captain Emma Walsh watched from the Retribution's bridge as humanity announced its presence to the galaxy in terms that needed no translation. Rail guns along the fleet's battle line spoke in unison. Spitting tungsten slugs accelerated to 20% of light speed. Projectiles that hit with the force of tactical nuclear weapons, but with pinpoint accuracy that could thread a needle. At interplanetary distances, the effect on the Shadowclaw vessels was immediate and devastating. Direct hit on Hostile 1. Lieutenant Maria Santos called out from her weapons console, her voice mixing professional satisfaction with barely contained excitement. Their shields are fluctuating ... and they're down. Repeat. Hostile 1's defensive screens have collapsed. Emma felt a surge of pride watching her weapons officer work. Santos had graduated top of her class from the Naval War College, but this was her first real combat against an unknown enemy using untested alien technology. The young woman was performing like a seasoned veteran, the lead Shadowclaw vessel commander Vexstar's flagship, though the humans didn't know his name yet, reeled under the impact of weapons that shouldn't have existed according to everything the Syndicate knew about galactic military technology. Fusion torpedoes followed the railgun barrage, each one a miniature star that bloomed against the alien hull with temperatures hot enough to vaporize battleship armor. But these weren't random shots fired in anger. Every projectile had been calculated by targeting computers that had learned their trade in humanity's endless wars against pirates, separatists, and each other. The humans weren't just shooting at the aliens. They were dissecting them with mathematical precision. Hostile 2 is trying to break off, reported Navigation Officer Chen, her voice tight with concentration as she tracked multiple moving targets. Across 3 dimensions, they're attempting to retreat toward the outer system. Negative, Admiral Stone's voice cut across the fleet communication channels like a blade. No one leaves until we've secured the civilian vessel and determined the extent of their crimes. All ships, pursuit pattern Delta. Don't let them run home to warn their friends. The human fleet moved like a pack of wolves, cutting off escape routes and herding the alien vessels back toward the burning merchant ship. It was a display of tactical coordination that spoke of centuries of warfare evolution. Where hesitation meant death and mercy was a luxury you offered only after achieving total victory. Commander. Extaris Bridge shook like a child's toy as another human torpedo found its mark. The explosion sending his command crew sprawling across deck plates that suddenly felt as stable as wet sand. Warning lights bathed everything in hellish red, while damage reports flooded in from every section of his ship. Impossible, he snarled, his razor-sharp claws leaving gouges in the armrests of his bone throne. These mammals fight like demons. How are they coordinating so precisely? Where did they get weapons that can penetrate our shields? His tactical officer, a scarred veteran of a dozen successful raids, looked up from his console with something Vexstar had never seen in Shadowclaw. Eyes before fear. Commander, their technology is beyond our databases. Those projectile weapons are accelerating matter to velocities that should be impossible. And their energy weapons are operating on principles we don't understand. Return fire, all weapons. Vexstar screamed, but even as he gave the order, he could see on his displays that his remaining ships were already breaking formation. The disciplined hunting pack that had terrorized 17 star systems was dissolving into scattered individuals trying to save their own scaled hides. The Shadowclaw weapons, designed for intimidating unarmed merchants, struck the human ships, and simply ... bounced off. Energy beams that could melt through civilian hulls scattered harmlessly against military-grade deflector shields. Missiles that had torn apart countless trading vessels were intercepted by point defense systems that tracked and destroyed incoming threats with casual efficiency. It was becoming clear to everyone involved that this wasn't a battle between equals. This was a predator learning what it felt like to be prey. Sir Communications Officer Rodriguez's voice carried a note of something approaching wonder. The merchant vessel is signaling us. They're trying to thank us. Admiral Stone nodded curtly. Put him through, Tommy. Full translation. Protocols. The main view screen flickered, and suddenly the bridge crew found themselves looking at an alien face that was nothing like the reptilian nightmare they'd been fighting. Fox-like features dominated the screen, large, expressive eyes, a delicate snout, and fur that looked soft as silk. When she spoke, her translator carried notes of wonder and desperate gratitude. Unknown warriors, the alien captain's voice trembled with emotion. You actually came to help strangers. We thought no one in the galaxy cared about simple traders anymore. Emma felt something shift in her chest, a reminder that behind all the tactics and weapons and military precision, they were fighting to protect real people with real lives and real families. The alien woman's eyes were wide with the kind of disbelief that came from being rescued. When you'd already given up hope, Admiral Stone's expression softened slightly, though his voice retained its military bearing. Ma'am, I'm Admiral Marcus Stone of the Terran Federation. No one attacks civilians on our watch. You're safe now, and we're going to get you home. The alien captain's eyes filled with tears that looked remarkably similar to human ones. Terrans, she whispered as if testing the word. We will remember this name. We'll tell every peaceful species in the galaxy about the warriors who came from nowhere to save strangers. Behind her, Emma could see human marines were already boarding the crippled merchant vessel through emergency airlocks, their powered armor carrying medical supplies and evacuation equipment instead of weapons. The same species that had just demonstrated devastating military capability was now risking their lives to save alien civilians they'd never met. Commander Vexstar watched this impossible scene unfold on his own tactical displays and felt something he'd never experienced in his entire predatory existence. The cold realization that everything he thought he knew about the universe was wrong. These weren't soft prey animals who fought from weakness and desperation. These were something far more dangerous, predators with principles, warriors with conscience, and killers who chose to save instead of destroy. The question wasn't whether humanity would win this battle. The question was whether the Shadowclaw Syndicate would survive long enough to warn the rest of the galaxy about the new apex predators who had just announced themselves to the stars. The interrogation room aboard the UFS Retribution was a masterpiece of psychological warfare disguised as simple functionality. Clean white walls reflected soft, and lighting that eliminated shadows but somehow made everything feel exposed and vulnerable. The air recycling system hummed quietly in the background, a gentle reminder that life itself was controlled by the captors. Commander Vexstar found this sterile environment infinitely more terrifying than any dungeon or torture chamber his species had ever devised. He sat chained to a chair that had been designed with human proportions in mind, making his reptilian frame appear awkward and diminished. The restraints weren't the crude shackles he might have expected from a primitive species, but rather some kind of adaptive metal that had molded itself perfectly to his anatomy, making escape impossible without causing serious injury. Across from him, Admiral Marcus Stone sat reviewing a tablet with the kind of clinical detachment a doctor might show while examining test results. The human's scarred face revealed nothing. but his gray eyes occasionally flicked up to study Vexstar with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating prey. "Your species has been quite busy," Stone said conversationally, his tone suggesting they might be discussing the weather rather than galactic-scale atrocities. "We've been monitoring Shadowclaw operations for exactly 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. Impressive resume you've built." Vexstar's scales rippled with barely contained rage. "For months? How was that possible?" The Shadowclaw had never encountered this Terran Federation before today, never even heard rumors of their existence. Yet somehow these mammals claimed to have been watching from the shadows like cosmic stalkers. 17 conquered systems, Stone continued, scrolling through his data with medanging calm. 43 billion sentient beings enslaved, sold, or executed for entertainment. Quite an operation you've got running there, Commander. You know nothing? Vexstar snarled, his voice carrying all the menace that had cowed 1,000 different species across the galaxy. "The Shadowclaw Empire spans 1,000 worlds. We have fleets that could darken your pathetic sun. You mammals are nothing more than another prey species that got lucky." But even as he spoke the words, Vexstar could hear the hollow ring of desperation in his own voice. The battle had lasted less than 20 minutes, and his supposedly invincible fleet had been scattered like leaves in a hurricane. 3 of his best ships were now drifting hulks, and the survivors had fled in panic toward the outer system. Stone looked up from his tablet with eyes like Arctic ice. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Actually, Commander, we know everything. Your homeworld's exact coordinates, Gorth Prime, 3rd planet in the Kethmoran system. Your fleet positions and patrol routes. The locations of your slave markets and breeding facilities." He leaned forward slightly. "Even the names and locations of your families." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Vexstar felt his blood turn to ice water as the implications hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just military intelligence gathered during a brief encounter. This was the kind of comprehensive surveillance that took years to develop, the kind of deep knowledge that could only come from watching, waiting, and planning for exactly this moment. "How?" he whispered, his earlier bravado evaporating like atmosphere through a hull breach. Stone stood and moved to the room's single viewport, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that spoke of absolute confidence. Through the transparent aluminum, Vexstar could see Quillen survivors being carefully transferred to human medical ships by armored marines who handled the injured aliens with surprising gentleness. "You made a critical error in judgment, Commander," Stone said without turning around. "You assumed we were prey because we came to rescue strangers. Let me explain something about human nature that your databases apparently missed." The Admiral's reflection in the viewport showed eyes that had seen too much violence and made too many hard decisions. "We evolved on a world where literally everything tried to kill us. Predators with teeth longer than your claws. Weather systems that could freeze or cook you in minutes. Diseases that could wipe out entire populations. And each other, we spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against our own species." Vexstar's scales began to pale as he listened to this casual recitation of planetary nightmare conditions. "We survived by becoming the deadliest thing on the planet," Stone continued, his voice carrying the weight of evolutionary history. "But we also survived by protecting our pack, by working together, by making sure that when one of us was in danger, all of us responded." The Admiral turned back to face his prisoner, and Vexstar saw something in those gray eyes that made his predatory instincts scream warnings. This wasn't just a warrior or even a killer. This was something far more dangerous, a protector who had chosen to become a monster so others wouldn't have to. "The difference between humans and you, Commander, is that our pack includes anyone who needs protection. Every innocent civilian, every peaceful trader, every species that chooses cooperation over conquest." Through the viewport, more human ships were arriving, dozens of them, their sleek hulls bristling with weapons, systems that could reduce planets to radioactive debris. Vexstar had never seen such a concentration of military power. And the casual way these vessels moved spoke of crews that treated interstellar warfare like a routine training exercise. "The galaxy is about to learn something new," Stone said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a prophet delivering divine judgment. Humanity doesn't just defend Earth. We defend everyone who can't defend themselves. Welcome to the new reality, Commander. Stone moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the control panel. Oh, and one more thing. That distress call. Your victim sent. It wasn't just received by us. You forwarded it to every peaceful species in known space, along with detailed intelligence about your fleet positions, base locations, and operational methods. Vexstar's blood turned to liquid nitrogen as understanding dawned. The Shadowclaw had built their empire on the assumption that prey species were isolated, helpless, and would never coordinate against their predators. But these humans hadn't. Just answered the call for help. They'd turned it into a galaxy-wide intelligence brief that would transform scattered victims into an organized resistance. Welcome to your new reality, Stone, repeated as the door began to seal. Earth doesn't make prey animals. We make predators with principles. And you just became our primary objective. The door sealed with a soft hiss, leaving Vexstar alone with the terrifying knowledge that his species had just awakened, something that should have stayed sleeping in the dark between the stars. Humanity had entered the galaxy not as conquerors, seeking territory or resources, but as guardians protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And the age of easy hunting was over forever. The end.